At her wedding reception, my daughter praised her absent mom and didn't acknowledge me. The parent who single-handedly took care of her since she was an infant because her mom didn't want to be a wife and parent anymore. I investigated only to find out that my ex-wife lied to our daughter about everything that happened. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, if you enjoy these kinds of stories, support us by subscribing to this channel. Click on the like button and tell us where you are watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. I never planned on being a single parent. Hell, I didn't even think I'd be a father at all when we first got married. Marlene and I were barely out of college. Young, broke, full of foolish hope that love alone could keep a roof over our heads. She was beautiful, confident, with the kind of presence that made rooms tilt in her direction. Me? I was steady, dependable, the kind of man who kept his promises even when he didn't have the tools to keep everything else. When she told me she was pregnant, I remember her face didn't match the joy I felt. She looked at me like I had shackled her to something she never asked for. And in a way, I guess she believed that. But I was over the moon. I imagined the tiny fingers, the midnight feedings, the lullabies off key. I had no idea that I'd be doing it alone. Not because death took her, but because she simply chose to leave. It wasn't a dramatic departure, no screaming or shattered dishes. Just one morning, when our daughter was barely 3 months old, Marlene told me over cold coffee that she was done. "I'm not cut out for this," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I never wanted to be a mother. I only stayed this long because I felt guilty." I asked her what she meant by this long, as if 3 months of half-hearted parenting and emotional distance was some sort of endurance test. She shrugged and told me she had met someone else. Younger, freer, someone who didn't tie her to a life she never wanted. I asked her about our daughter, and she actually winced like I'd mentioned a bill she forgot to pay. "She's better off with you," she said. "You love her more than I ever could." And just like that, she packed a single suitcase and walked out. No tearful goodbye, no motherly kiss on the forehead, just silence where her promises used to be. Raising a child alone isn't something you can prepare for, especially when you're still bleeding from the emotional whiplash of abandonment. There were nights I sat on the edge of our bed. Well, my bed now, with our daughter wailing in the other room, and I'd bury my face in my hands wondering what in God's name I'd done to deserve this. But no matter how broken I felt, I'd still get up, still pick her up, still hold her until she calmed. I remember one night. She was maybe 7 months old. I sang her to sleep with a lullaby I made up on the spot, voice cracking, tears falling onto her blanket. She looked up at me with these wide, trusting eyes, and I knew that no matter how much I had lost, I couldn't fail her. I just couldn't. I worked 2 jobs, one during the day, one remote at night, and still made every doctor's appointment, every parent-teacher meeting, every scraped knee emergency. I cut my own meals down to stretch the grocery budget. She never knew. She never had to. People always say she must have had a great mom when they see a well-raised daughter, and I used to smile and let them believe that. I didn't want her to carry the shame of what Marlene had done. I figured when she was old enough, I'd tell her. Or maybe I wouldn't. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe love was enough. I documented everything. Her first steps, first words, even her first heartbreak when some little boy in middle school told her she wasn't pretty enough. I was always there, camera in one hand, Kleenex in the other. I stayed up with her during finals, ran drills when she was trying out for debate, sat in the front row of every school play. I thought we had something rare, a bond built not on obligation, but on shared struggle and unconditional love. I wasn't just her father. I was her anchor, or so I believed. As she grew older, she asked more questions about her mother. I answered them gently, carefully. I never lied, but I edited the truth. I told her Marlene had some growing to do, that sometimes people leave because they're lost, not because they don't care. "But why didn't she ever call?" she asked once, around age 9, when the mother-daughter brunch at school left her the only kid without a guest. I remember that question hitting me like a sucker punch. I had no answer that could heal that particular kind of wound. I just told her, "She's missing out on the best person I know." She smiled, but there was always a flicker of longing behind her eyes, a part of her that needed something I couldn't give, no matter how many nights I stayed up rocking her to sleep. Despite everything, I believed we were unbreakable. When she graduated from college, she hugged me so tightly I thought, maybe this was worth it. Maybe I did okay. She got a good job, met a decent guy, James, and they got engaged after 2 years of dating. She brought him over for dinner, and I grilled him the way any protective father would. But I liked him. He respected her. He called me sir, even when I told him not to. When she asked if I'd help pay for the wedding, I didn't hesitate. I paid for the venue, the catering, even gave her the keys to a new car as an early gift. I gave them the old family house, recently renovated and completely debt-free, as a wedding present. It felt right, like the final piece in a long journey, a reward for both of us. I remember thinking, this is our moment. This is when she tells the world who stood by her. I didn't need a spotlight. I just wanted to thank you. A nod. A small piece of recognition that I wasn't crazy for pouring my entire being into raising her. That everything I gave wasn't invisible. I sat at the reception in my best suit, nerves tight, heart full, ready to hear the speech that would make all those sleepless nights and quiet sacrifices feel seen. I had no idea that she would cut me out of the story entirely. She was always brilliant, even when the world gave her every excuse not to be. From the moment she could form sentences, my daughter had a sharpness about her, a curiosity that never stopped asking why. She didn't just want answers, she wanted understanding. I remember watching her teach herself how to tie her shoes after refusing help for the 5th time. "I'll get it," she said, voice full of that stubborn fire I secretly admired. And 10 minutes later, she had a perfect knot and the proudest smile I'd ever seen. That was who she was, determined, bright, and beautiful in a way that wasn't just about her looks. It was her spirit. People noticed her. Teachers loved her. Neighbors often stopped me to say how lucky I was. And I was. No matter how many hours I worked or how tired I came home, seeing her thrive made everything worth it. She made me feel like all the broken pieces of my life had come together to build something whole again. She became the kind of teenager other parents bragged about. Straight A's, class president, volunteer hours at the animal shelter. She was the valedictorian of her high school and gave a speech that made half the auditorium cry. I still remember the line. "We are the authors of our own stories, and I plan to write mine in bold." I stood in the crowd, holding back tears, thinking, that's my girl. I had spent so many years afraid that the absence of her mother would somehow shape her into someone wounded or bitter. But she was light. She was strong. And even though there were occasional fights, late curfews, forgotten chores, her frustration when I got a little too protective, it never changed the undercurrent of love between us. Or so I thought. I never imagined that love could be rewritten. That history itself could be twisted until I was no longer the parent who stayed, but the villain in a story I didn't know we were telling. College was the first time I started to notice the shift. It wasn't immediate, not loud or obvious. Just a quiet distancing. She called less. She stopped asking for advice. When we did talk, there was a strange coolness in her voice, like she was keeping a part of herself hidden. I chalked it up to independence. After all, isn't that what I raised her for? To be self-reliant, to chase her goals, to not need me every moment? But there was something else, something more unnerving. She started mentioning her mother. Casually at first, like, "I talked to mom the other day," or "she said I should try therapy, just to process everything." I didn't say much. I was careful not to show my unease. I had always wanted her to reconnect if that's what she needed. But it was the way she said it. Like Marlene had always been a figure just outside the frame, waiting to be invited in. Not the woman who left without a backward glance. Not the person who abandoned her before her first word. The first time I heard her defend Marlene was during winter break, her sophomore year. We were sitting at the kitchen table, going through old photos, and she lingered on one where she was in my arms, barely 6 months old, while Marlene stood beside us, stiff and uninterested. I made a small comment, something about how even then, Marlene looked like she had one foot out the door. My daughter snapped her head up. "Maybe she was just overwhelmed," she said, sharper than I expected. "You weren't easy to live with either, were you?" I stared at her, stunned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. She didn't answer, just flipped to the next photo and said nothing more. That moment stuck with me. Not just the words, but the venom behind them. Like there was a version of me in her mind that I didn't recognize. A version someone else had painted. Still, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just trying to reconcile both sides of her family. Maybe she was wrestling with loyalty and guilt. I told myself it was natural. But the comments didn't stop. Over time, they multiplied. Passive remarks about how Marlene had really changed, how people make mistakes, how you always tell your side, but she never got to tell hers. It started to feel less like she was finding her own truth and more like she was adopting someone else's. I could see it in her eyes, the way she watched me when I talked about the past. Not with warmth, not with understanding, but with something colder. Like doubt, like suspicion, like the seeds of a story had been planted deep inside her, and they were growing roots. When she got engaged to James, I thought maybe we were turning a corner. He brought her back to life after a bad breakup, and I could see she was happy. She wanted me to walk her down the aisle, wanted me to meet his family, wanted my input on every detail, from the color of the napkins to the song she danced to with me at the reception. I felt useful again. Loved. Needed. We spent weekends together going over wedding spreadsheets, touring venues, taste testing cakes. For a while, it was like we were back in sync. I remember telling a friend, "She's coming home to me again." I believed that. I clung to it. I should have known better. Looking back, I realize now there were signs even then. She insisted on inviting Marlene. Not just inviting her, but giving her a special role. "She's my mom," she said when I asked if that was wise. "She's changed, Dad. She's trying." I didn't fight it. I just nodded and said, "If that's what you want." But inside, I was unraveling. Not because I didn't want Marlene to be there. I'd made peace with her a long time ago. But because I knew she hadn't changed. Not really. Some people learn. Others just lie better. I kept quiet, hoping that maybe, just maybe, my daughter would remember who had always shown up, who'd always been there. I didn't need the world to applaud me. I just needed her to see me. The night before the wedding, we had a father-daughter dinner. Just the two of us. We sat at her favorite Italian restaurant, a quiet little place I used to take her for birthday dinners. She looked stunning, elegant, grown, radiant. I raised a glass to her and said, "No matter what happens tomorrow, know that I am proud of you. I always have been." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I know how much you did for me." That moment felt like gold. Like everything was okay. I went to bed that night thinking the next day would be the best of my life. I had no idea that by the end of that reception, I'd feel like a stranger in my own story. The day of the wedding arrived like a sunrise after a storm. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Even like the kind of carefully staged happiness you see in magazines or commercials. I stood at the edge of the venue's garden courtyard, dressed in a charcoal suit she picked out for me herself, watching as guests filled the white chairs lined up in neat rows. The flowers were pale pink and ivory, cascading over every arch and table, and soft music played from a string quartet near the altar. I kept my hands folded, my breath steady. I had raised this girl alone, paid for every inch of the ceremony, smiled through the awkwardness of having Marlene there, knowing full well she hadn't earned a seat at any table, let alone the one closest to our daughter. Still, I told myself it was a day for grace, for celebration, for letting go of old wounds. When the processional music began and I walked her down the aisle, my hand linked in hers, I felt something crack in my chest, not from pain, but from a pride so immense it threatened to burst out of me. She looked radiant, glowing. Every step we took felt like a page turning in a story I had written with every ounce of myself for over 2 decades. I handed her off to James with a quiet nod, swallowed the lump in my throat, and stepped back. When the vows were exchanged and the officiant declared them husband and wife, I clapped harder than anyone, even as Marlene dabbed at her eyes like she had actually earned the right to be moved. I didn't look at her. I just kept my eyes on my daughter, thinking we made it. We really made it. The reception hall was dimly lit, bathed in gold and champagne hues, with candles flickering along every surface. People mingled, laughed, clinked glasses. I sat at the parents' table, right next to her, my place card elegantly printed with father of the bride. Across from me sat Marlene, draped in a gown that probably cost more than my first car, wearing the kind of makeup that said I'm healed even though she never once said sorry. She smiled at me once, briefly, and I nodded, not out of forgiveness, but because it wasn't the time. I told myself again, this is her day, not mine. Don't ruin it. Don't stir the past. I drank water, not wine, just to keep my head clear. The moment that would wreck me started with the clinking of a fork against a glass. Light and innocent. The kind of sound you expect to lead into a toast full of love. My daughter stood, microphone in hand, radiant still, her dress shimmering under the fairy lights. The crowd hushed. She smiled. "Thank you all for being here," she began, voice sweet and strong. "Today means so much to me, not just because I married the love of my life, but because I get to share this moment with the people who shaped me." I leaned in slightly, expecting something, anything, about us. About me. I didn't need a standing ovation. Just a line. A name. A nod. Instead, she turned toward Marlene. "I want to thank my mom," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "You were the one constant in my heart, even when you couldn't be near me. You've taught me what it means to be strong, to grow from mistakes, to love without apology." The crowd murmured, claps, smiles. My ears started ringing. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. She went on. "Even though we had time apart, I know you were always with me in spirit. You're my role model. You're the reason I know how to be a woman, a wife, and one day, a mother." She reached out and touched Marlene's hand. "Thank you for never giving up on me." I felt something sink, deep and cold and slow, like a stone dropping into my chest. She turned back to the crowd. And to my dad, my breath caught. "Here it is. Here it comes. We didn't always see eye to eye," she said, smiling a little. "But I know you did what you thought was best." Laughter. Another wave of applause. And that was it. Nothing else. No mention of the late nights, the scraped knees, the sacrifices, the birthdays, the tutoring, the loans I took out to pay her tuition when scholarships didn't cover it all. Nothing. Just a vague, lukewarm acknowledgement that I existed, that I had thought I was doing right. It wasn't praise. It wasn't gratitude. It was an afterthought, a courtesy line in a speech meant to glorify the one who left. I don't remember the next 10 minutes clearly. I smiled, I think. I nodded when people looked at me, but I was somewhere else, somewhere cold. I excused myself before the father-daughter dance and went outside. The garden was quieter now, candles swaying in the breeze. I stood alone under the same arch where I had given her away just hours before. Except now it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a funeral for something I had believed in. I leaned against the post, my hands trembling slightly. Not from rage, not even from grief. Just disbelief. How did she forget? How did she forget everything I did? I stayed out there longer than I intended. I heard the music playing from inside, her dancing with James, laughing. Then the soft thump of someone approaching behind me. I turned to see my friend Marcus, one of the few people who knew everything. He looked at me, expression grim. "I don't know how you sat through that," he said quietly. I almost walked out myself. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. He put a hand on my shoulder. "She knows better," he said, "whether she wants to admit it or not." I nodded, but the words didn't help. I wasn't angry at her. Not yet. I was still trying to make it make sense. Still trying to believe there was a version of that moment that wasn't betrayal. But deep down, I knew. I knew what I had witnessed. She had chosen her mother, not just in private, but in public. And in doing so, she had erased me. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my suit, the tie loosened, the jacket crumpled beside me. I stared at the floor for what felt like hours. My phone buzzed, texts from relatives congratulating me. None of them saw the wound. None of them noticed that my daughter had delivered a eulogy for my role in her life, not a thank you. I thought of all the times I told myself she'd understand one day, that the truth would rise to the surface. But the truth didn't matter now. She'd told the world her version, and in it, I was just a footnote. And that was all I needed to make my decision. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that feels loud, like it's humming just beneath your skin. My suit was still draped over the armchair where I'd tossed it the night before, and my tie lay curled on the floor like a discarded snake. The hotel room was dim, the curtains still drawn, and the only light came from the sliver of sun peeking beneath the edges. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, elbows on my knees, staring at the carpet. I'd raised a daughter with everything I had. I didn't expect sainthood. I didn't expect glory. But I never thought I'd be erased from her story like I was some distant relative who occasionally mailed birthday cards. And now that I had seen it happen, with applause, no less, I couldn't just go back to pretending everything was fine. I needed to know how she got there, how she learned to believe in a lie so deeply that she could speak it into a microphone, smile while doing it, and never even glance in my direction to see if she had gutted me. It started with curiosity, a need for answers. At first, I told myself I was being petty, that I was nursing a bruised ego. But it wasn't ego. It was survival. If someone tears out the foundation of everything you built your life around, don't you have a right to dig into the rubble and see what was hiding underneath? So I started small. I texted her high school friend Cassidy, sweet girl, always called me Mr. C. She was at the wedding. I asked her if she had a minute to talk. Her reply came fast. Of course. I've been meaning to reach out. That was my first clue. We talked that evening. She sounded hesitant at first, like someone testing the waters before saying too much. But once she heard the tone in my voice, measured, calm, but unmistakably hollow, she let out a sigh and said, I don't know how to say this without making things worse. I told her to just be honest. So she did. She said that over the last few years, my daughter had been spending more and more time with Marlene, especially during college breaks. She said she was shocked to hear how my daughter described her childhood during late-night hangouts. She always made it sound like your house was cold, strict, that you were emotionally distant, that her mom left because she felt unsafe. I didn't know what to believe, but it didn't sound like the dad I knew. Unsafe. That word stuck in my throat like a piece of glass. That was the moment the anger began, not the fiery kind, but the deep, aching kind that simmers in your gut and never quite boils over. I thanked her and ended the call, pacing my living room with my phone still in my hand. Unsafe? I had worked until my hands cracked to keep the lights on. I had cried behind locked bathroom doors so she wouldn't see the panic attacks. I had attended every school function, even the boring ones, even when I was running on 2 hours of sleep. And she told people she felt unsafe? I dug deeper. I called Laura, an old mutual friend who had stayed in touch with both Marlene and me over the years, neutral territory. She had always taken a compassionate stance, never picking sides, even when it would have been easy to. When I asked if she'd heard anything about what Marlene had been telling our daughter, her tone shifted instantly. I was afraid this would come up, she said, her voice low. Marlene, she rewrote everything, sweetheart. She's been saying for years that you forced her out, that you manipulated the custody, that you told your daughter lies to turn her against her. I sat down slowly, my knees weak. But that's not true, I said. She left. She walked out. I begged her to stay. Laura didn't argue. I know. I was there. But that's not the story she tells anymore. I felt sick. Physically sick. My hands trembled as I ended the call and stared at the walls of my house. The same house where I'd changed diapers, cooked meals, watched her take her first steps. A house filled with memories I thought were ours. And now, I couldn't tell which ones had been twisted, edited, poisoned. I pulled out old photo albums that night, flipping through them like I was searching for evidence in a trial. Birthday parties where I was the only parent. Dance recitals where I clapped the loudest. First day of school photos with my arm wrapped around her tiny frame. Were those memories still real to her? Or had they all been overwritten by the version Marlene fed her? One where I was the villain and she was the misunderstood victim? In the weeks that followed, I did what I never thought I'd do. I confronted Marlene. Not in anger, not with shouting, just a single, carefully worded email. We need to talk. I know what you've been telling her. She replied within an hour. Casual, almost smug. She came to her own conclusions, she wrote. I never told her anything she didn't want to believe. That line, so slippery, so cowardly, made me clench my fists until my nails dug into my palms. She hadn't just lied. She had manipulated a child's memory of her father. And worse, my daughter believed it. She chose to believe it. Somewhere along the way, love had lost its voice, and lies had picked up the mic. I realized then that I had been grieving the wrong thing. It wasn't just about the speech or the public omission or even the fact that she gave Marlene the credit. It was about trust, about the slow erosion of everything I thought we built. I had assumed that truth would protect me, that the years of bedtime stories and school lunches and sick days and broken heart pep talks would be enough to hold us together. But lies are more seductive than love when they come from the person you've always wondered about. Marlene didn't just re-enter her life. She rewrote it. By the end of that month, I stopped waiting for explanations. I stopped hoping she'd come to me in tears with an apology or a revelation. I had been replaced. Not just in the photo albums or in her memories, but in her heart. She made her choice, and I finally saw it clearly. No matter how much I gave, it could all be undone by the one who gave nothing but stories. And I was done being the backup plan. There comes a point when silence becomes its own kind of cruelty, not because it lacks noise, but because it's full of everything unsaid. That was where I lived for weeks after uncovering the truth. Not angry, not screaming, not pacing the floors looking for revenge. Just quiet. A dense, heavy quiet. The kind that fills your chest and makes your heartbeat feel like an echo in a tomb. I stopped reaching out. Stopped checking in. I didn't send texts. Didn't ask how the honeymoon was. Didn't answer calls when she tried, briefly, sporadically, to touch base. Something in me had finally settled. Or maybe it had died. Either way, I knew one thing. I was finished playing the role of the reliable father who always showed up no matter how many times he was dismissed. The car was the first thing I took back. A brand new SUV I had gifted her 2 weeks before the wedding. Leather seats, pristine rims, top-of-the-line safety features. I remembered the way she squealed when I handed her the keys, threw her arms around me, and said, "Dad, you didn't have to, but I love it." And she meant it, then. I don't doubt that. But love built on convenience isn't love. It's gratitude masquerading as affection, and it fades fast when it's no longer needed. She hadn't thanked me since. Hadn't mentioned it at all, even after the wedding. So I called the dealership. Transferred the lease back into my name. The tracking system told me where it was parked. I had it towed that same afternoon. She called, frantic, not even an hour later. "Dad, the car's gone. Did it get stolen?" "No," I said flatly. "It didn't." "What? What do you mean? Where is it?" "It's mine again," I replied, calm but firm. I took it back. Her voice cracked, flustered. "You what?" "Dad, you gave that to me." "I gave it to my daughter," I said. Not to the woman who stood in front of 200 people and pretended I didn't raise her. There was a pause. I could hear her trying to form a response, her breathing shaky, like the weight of what I was saying hadn't hit until just now. "You're serious?" "I am." "But that's not fair," she whispered. "Neither was what you did," I said, and hung up. The house was next. A family property, fully paid off, newly renovated, that I had put in her name as a wedding gift. My lawyer handled the paperwork, the quiet undoing of a deed that had only just begun to settle in public records. Turns out when you're the sole title holder with a conditional clause in writing, you have leverage. And I used it. I'd been generous beyond reason, and I wouldn't apologize for retracting that generosity once I'd been made into a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. She had asked me for the house, saying, "It's not about the money, Dad. We just want something to build a life in." I had nodded then, thinking I was giving her a foundation. I hadn't realized I was building someone else's fairy tale while she erased me from the story. James, her husband, didn't see it coming either. He was confused, tried to reach out, asked to meet. "I thought we were good," he said in a voicemail, the tone gentle but laced with tension. "This has nothing to do with me." But he was wrong. It had everything to do with him, because while my daughter may have rewritten history, he had benefited from the narrative. He sat across from me at dinner tables. He toasted with me. He accepted the job at my company that I arranged personally, a 6-figure salary with room to grow. And not once did he step in to defend me during that speech. Not once did he pull her aside and say, "Hey, maybe mention your dad." So I called HR the next day. Terminated his contract. Severance minimal. Reason, restructuring. My daughter called again the same day. This time, she was sobbing. "Dad, please, this is too much. You're punishing James for something I did." "No," I said. I'm removing my support. That's different. But you loved him. I loved who I thought you both were, I said. But that was based on a lie. I didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did, I cut in. You may not have planned it, but you meant it. You meant every word you said when you left me out of that speech. You meant to look your mother in the eye and thank her for everything I did. So don't pretend this is about feelings. This is about consequences. She cried harder, tried to talk over me. I waited. Let her cry. Let her plead. Then I said the one thing I knew I couldn't take back and still didn't regret. You have your mother now. Go to her when you need things. When life gets hard. When the rent's due, or the fridge is empty, or your car won't start. Go to the woman you stood up for. Because I won't be here anymore. She went quiet. Not a gasp, not a sob. Just a silence so sharp I could almost hear her understanding crash into her like glass on concrete. Then, a soft, broken whisper. Are you disowning me? I'm letting go, I said. That's different. Dad, please. Don't do this. I didn't, I replied. You did. And I ended the call. That night, for the first time in over 20 years, I slept with my phone on silent. No alarms. No texts. No emails about weddings or property transfers or job titles. Just quiet. Pure, complete quiet. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not because I was happy. Not because I had won. But because I had finally stopped trying to convince people to love me the way I deserved. I had spent my entire adult life being the safety net, the silent helper, the man behind the curtain. And when the curtain finally lifted, I saw who was left clapping and who wasn't. And now? Now I was done pretending that forgiveness should come before accountability. It's strange how quickly the noise dies down after you decide to stop explaining yourself. No more calls. No more frantic texts. No more secondhand updates through mutual friends asking if I was really serious about what I said. I was. I still am. And after the first few days of chaos, the pleading voicemails, the emails with subject lines like "please talk to me" or "one more chance," the world finally fell still. My house became quiet in a new way. Not the kind of quiet that echoes with loneliness, but the kind that settles into your bones like rest after a long, brutal storm. I didn't know I needed it until I felt it. And then, I couldn't believe I'd lived so long without it. I started going for walks again, long ones that had no destination. I'd pass through neighborhoods with white fences and kids playing on sidewalks, the kind of life I once tried to build. I'd sit at a coffee shop on weekends, sipping black coffee and watching people pass, unburdened by history. No one knew me there. No one looked at me with questions in their eyes. And I liked it that way. There were no shadows of Marlene, no traces of my daughter's laughter echoing through the aisles. Just me, my thoughts, and a quiet that finally felt earned. It's amazing what you notice when you're not bracing for impact. How blue the sky is. How good the air feels when you're not choking on resentment. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her. Of course I did. I thought about the way she used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives, her hand curled around a stuffed bear, her mouth slightly open. I thought about how she used to draw pictures of us, just the two of us, in crayon, and tape them to the fridge like museum pieces. I thought about the way she used to call me her whole world. Those memories aren't things I can scrub out. They're etched into me, into the walls of my house, into the albums I still haven't had the courage to pack away. But I also think about the speech. I think about the way she looked right past me when she said her mother was her strength. I think about the sound of 200 people clapping for a version of history that never existed. And I realize grief and betrayal can live in the same room, and neither one has to leave to make space for the other. A few weeks after everything settled, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Her name on the return address. My heart didn't race. My fingers didn't tremble. I didn't tear it open like a father desperate for redemption. I just held it for a minute, looked at the familiar handwriting, and placed it on the table. It stayed there for 3 days. On the 4th day, I slid it into a drawer. Unread. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. I already knew what it said. Apologies. Explanations. Maybe even tears between the lines. But none of it would change the truth. Some things, once broken, don't return to their original form. They become something else entirely. And sometimes, that something is distance. I talked to Marcus again, The only friend who didn't treat my decision like a nervous breakdown. He came over one evening with beer and silence, the kind of friend who doesn't push but doesn't pretend either. We sat on the porch, watching dusk settle across the street. After a while, he said, "You don't have to feel guilty for choosing yourself." I didn't answer right away. I just sipped my drink and watched a streetlight flicker to life. "I don't feel guilty," I finally said. "I just feel free." He nodded. "Good. You've earned that." And I had. I think that's the part most people don't understand about disowning someone, especially a child. They think it's about anger, about pride, about punishment. But it's not. Not for me. It was about finally acknowledging that love without truth is just performance. That giving until there's nothing left of you doesn't make you noble, it makes you a ghost. I gave her everything. I built a life for her from scraps. And when she stood in the brightest moment of her life, she erased me. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And mine was to stop letting that choice define me. There's a kind of peace that comes with boundaries, real boundaries, not the polite ones that still let people take from you with a smile. The kind that says, "You don't get to hurt me," and still call it love. The kind that builds fences around your heart, not to keep others out, but to keep yourself in. I've learned that silence is sometimes the loudest declaration of self-respect. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't send birthday cards. I didn't ask around to see if she was doing okay. Not because I hate her. I don't. But because I finally love myself enough to stop bleeding for someone who won't acknowledge the wounds. Some nights, I sit in the living room and play old home videos. I hear her little voice again, see her wobbling on unsteady legs toward me. I watch myself catch her, laugh, spin her around. I don't cry. I don't turn it off. I just watch. Not because I miss the past, but because I respect it. Those years were real. That love was real. It mattered. And I refuse to let her revision erase it. Let her believe what she wants. Let her call her mother a hero. I know what I did. And I don't need a microphone or a crowd to validate it. In the quiet of my home, surrounded by the memories I no longer run from, I made peace with my decision. And in that peace, I found something I never thought I would again. Not just rest, but resolution. I had done my part. I had carried the weight. I had weathered the betrayal. And when the time came, I had chosen to let go, not out of hate, but out of necessity. Sometimes love doesn't look like holding on. Sometimes it looks like walking away. If you've ever had to choose your peace over someone else's comfort, especially when that person was family, you are not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us where you draw the line. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true life stories that speak to the heart and honor the power of boundaries. See you soon in the next story.